Diesel, stop.
Time to find out what a headshot does to a zombie.
He's not a zombie.
Hello, spooky friends. Tonight we're sneaking into the 21st century, but not very far. There are a few shows from the 2000s I love, and Blood Ties is one of them. The first novel in Tanya Huff's Blood Books series came out in 1991, and I gave it a hard swerve when I found out the vampire was supposed to be the illegitimate son of Henry VIII. That smacked a bit too much of I was a princess in a past life. I did give it a try a bit later and ended up loving this hyper-violent, well-written story, so I was pretty excited when the TV show came out years after the book series ended. Blood Ties premiered on the Lifetime channel in March of 2007. Huff was heavily involved and often on set. 3 of her books were adapted into the show. You would think the network would be a problem, but they did a good job of not gutting the concept, and the characters are very true to the books. What they did do was emphasize the love triangle, to the point where Huff wrote a new foreword to the books where she warns, if you're expecting romance here, you will be disappointed. The story centers around Vicki Nelson, played by Christina Cox. Nelson was a police detective who left the force when she developed retinitis pigmentosa, a disease where the edges of your sight go dark little by little. She knew if she stayed, she would be relegated to a desk job. To stay in the field, she became a private investigator. In a bit of fortuitous casting, Huff had seen Cox on FX the series, and she was one of the people she'd pictured to play Vicki. Cox's skill in Taekwondo and Muay Thai definitely show in the fight scenes. I wouldn't want to meet her in a dark alley. Vicki treats the supernatural with exasperated pragmatism.
Like Canterbury. Mike's gonna love this one.
Dylan Neal was worried about getting after work after a long stint with The Bold and the Beautiful.
There's certain, expectations or lack of expectations for soap opera actors.
He landed on his feet. He plays Detective Mike Salucci, Nelson's former partner in more ways than one. He's the show's voice of reason who takes an awful lot of convincing to believe any of the stuff Vicki is experiencing. Rounding out the cast is the Duke of Richmond and Somerset, Henry Fitzroy, played by Kyle Schmid. I can't remember if it's the book or the show, but somewhere it's explained that vampires age slowly, which is why a 22-year-old Schmidt can play a vampire who died at 17. Tanya Huff's interest in history led her to Fitzroy's story. The young Duke became ill with consumption and died some weeks later. She thought that sounded like vampires, especially considering that his father-in-law, Thomas Howard, ordered that he be wrapped in lead and taken in a closed cart for secret internment. Servants filled the cart with straw rather than lead, but there were only 2 mourners who followed at a distance. I don't know enough about the 16th century to know if this was a thing, but it seeded a story in Huff's mind. Schmidt's performance is pitch perfect. Fitzroy is a modern guy with a modern accent living in a condo, but you can see his heritage in his posture and demeanor. In the books, Henry's day job is romance writer. I found this a bit on the nose and was happy when the show changed his occupation to writing graphic novels. Remember when people cared about the difference between comics and graphic novels? This will become relevant later. The art in the show, as far as I can pin down, is by Guillaume Boucher, but there are several illustrators on the show, plus the art director. The art is good enough that I went searching for a graphic novel tie-in, but there isn't one. Honorable mention to Gina Holden, who plays Nelson's assistant, Corinne Fennell. Fennell is a delightful goth, and it's worth tuning in just to see her outfits. In the books, the Fennell character doesn't become Vicki's assistant, and Huff said she wished she'd thought of it to avoid the Smurfette syndrome. The books and the show are set in Toronto, but producer Kirk Shaw actually had a studio available in Vancouver, so that's where they ended up filming, using carefully chosen exteriors and a good B-roll. All of the actors mention frequent breaks for airplanes overhead or trains nearby. That seemed odd and cheap to me until I looked up Kirk Shaw and found he has a reputation for cheaping out and shafting writers and vendors. He has multiple strikes with both Canadian and American guilds, and I will now say the word allegedly so I don't get sued. None of the Blood Ties actors had anything bad to say, but you wouldn't, would you? Also, Shaw was one of a handful of producers. None of that affected the final product, which is superb. The writing is tight and clever, and of the 22 episodes, I can only think of one clunker, and really, that was just an awkward hissing scene with Henry. The pilot follows the plot of the first book, Blood Prize, pretty closely. A nerdy incel has decided to get everything he wants by summoning a demon. Casting Michael Eklund as the nerd gives him more of a school shooter vibe than the math geek in the books, but it works. He is remarkably creepy. Henry gets involved because the demon has to feed when he's called, and when he does, he drains the blood from his victims. The newspapers, remember those? Are crying vampire, and Henry has to figure out what's going on before the torches and pitchforks come out. Vicky is on board because she sees, more or less, one of the murders take place. Mike is there because, well, murder. Also, you may recognize the final demon, Astaroth, from the pilot episode of Brimstone, though they seem to have given him googly eyes. The chemistry between the three actors is magic. The final auditions actually involve several trios of actors rotating readings to see who worked best together. It's chemistry that got these three hired. Schmidt's favorite episodes, because they were challenging, are also mine, but for a different reason. So we're watching the beginning of episode 7 when suddenly I shout, "Is that Julian fucking Sands?" To which the spousal unit replied, "Who is Julian Sands?" Horror isn't his thing, but I love him anyway. Sands plays Inquisitor Javier Mendoza, who wishes to save Henry's soul in the way most Inquisitors save souls. He is as good as you'd expect, playing a torturer who has justified his course of action in his mind over centuries. And no, he's not a vampire. Sorta. There is a scene at the end of the episode where Mike gets nibbled. I mention this because Henry's prop teeth were super pointy. Probably pointier than a safe prop should have been. Like all fake teeth, they were a little awkward. A kissing scene between Vicky and Henry didn't go so well at first. Teeth clashed and a fang went flying. Smooches were fang-free after that. Cox was left with definite bite marks on her arms from feeding scenes, but Neil got it worse. There was actual blood and a very surprised and upset actor. Oopsie. By the way, after the show ended, Schmidt kept those fangs. In a later interview at a convention, it was pretty clear that Dylan Neal was well over blood ties and would rather move on to anything else. Maybe them sharp little teeths had something to do with it. Sands was not the only outstanding guest star. Even though there were only 22 episodes, technically the show had 2 seasons, with Lifetime picking it up for 10 more episodes after the initial 12-episode run. What I'm trying to say is the show attracted 2 first-rate guest stars in the first 2 seasons, which is pretty unusual. The 19th episode, Wrapped, adapts Huff's book Bloodlines. It's the classic, don't remove that sacred medallion from the chest of that ancient mummy. Guys, that is always a bad idea. Thieves intercept a shipment of Incan artifacts, a mummy amongst them. One thief removes said medallion, which, by the way, is a great prop, and is immediately grabbed and drained of life. As the mummy regains his form, we see the delightful face of Danny Trejo. Rejoicing is heard throughout the living room. Yes, even the spousal unit loves Danny Trejo. The other thief is taken as a servant, tasked with gathering more souls for this ancient Incan sorcerer. He especially wants to snack on this one powerful soul he can sense in the city. Henry, of course. Trejo is given the best joke of the entire series, which I'm going to spoil here because I am an awful person.
Huh? I mean, I would have thought that a vampire would have been like a prince or something, but draws these horror comics.
Good work. Only one thing. They're called graphic novels.
In the last video, I talked about how Brimstone went out on a really good episode. Everything felt wrapped up. Blood Ties did not. It was very clear from the ending and from interviews that no one had any idea Cancellation was coming. They were all looking forward to filming the continuation of a miserable cliffhanger at the end of Season 2. It was not to be. I can't find any definitive reason why the show was cancelled, but my guess is that the network didn't know what to do with it. What Lifetime was doing with a horror show in the first place is a mystery. I think they paired it with Lisa Williams' Among the Dead for a spooky block of programming, but it didn't fit, and it was never going to fit, even if they wedged in romance. Maybe it would have done better on Fox. Just kidding. There was a concerted effort amongst fans to revive the show, but it came to naught. There is fanfic, but y'all can find that on your own. These days, Kyle Schmidt is playing Mike Franks on NCIS Origins. Christina Cox is doing guest bits, most recently 3 episodes of Reacher. Dylan Neal and his wife Becky Southwell are writing and producing the gourmet detective mysteries for Hallmark, which, honestly, I kind of want to watch now. Blood Ties is available on DVD from eBay, and there is an excellent quality upload by The Dark Zone on YouTube, which I've linked below. Special thanks to Blood Ties fans who built sites, conducted interviews, and tried their best to get the show renewed. And thank you, spooky friends. I love you to death. Good night.